A logo can look perfect when you have it on full screen, but it can still fail once you shrink it down to icon size, or even place it on a busy background, blur your eyes slightly to squint to see if it makes sense. And suddenly, all the letters and the details merge together, and then it's unclear what you're looking at. And at this point, it becomes really difficult to read it. The logo would no longer work. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 7 mistakes that destroy a logo's legibility and the exact steps you can take to ensure that you avoid them at all costs. So let's get into it. So tip number 1 is simplicity is clarity. The fewer parts a logo has and the fewer elements it has, then the more likely that it will be easier to understand and digest and remember it in the long run. So for example, here looking at the Nike logo, it's really simple and easy to understand, and even a 5-year-old can draw it from memory. And the reason for this is because it has really few elements and is precise and is to the T. It doesn't have overcrowded information, and it has one direction and it follows it to the T. And this is what you need to make sure that your logo has. You need to ask yourself, is it legible? Does it have clarity? And does it make sense? So make sure you keep it simple so that your logo is legible. Tip number 2, space the letters. I see this a lot of times. People don't really focus on kerning and spacing the letters, distance between each letter. As you type words, obviously on the computer, things will be mathematically kerned, but this doesn't make sense because the distance between an R and an A will be different to another 2 letters because some letters are curved, some letters are straight. So you need to make sure you kern it based on the relationship of those letters as you type them out. For example, here on the right, you've got brand. One is kerned incorrectly, and then the other you won't even notice because it just makes sense. And something that's kerned to perfection, you don't really notice. You only start noticing it when something feels off. So if you do this correctly, then most likely you won't notice a good kerned text, but you will notice a badly spaced one. So keep this in mind and make sure that your text is kerned properly. And I would suggest to not just trust the computer to do this by eye, because you can get this right. Just take a step back and make sure that it's correct so that you are happy with it. And once everything looks balanced to you by eye, then you're good to go. But don't just type it out and just upload it, because this most likely will be incorrectly kerned and it will lose trust with your audience down the line. Tip number 3, you need to use strong contrast. And for all of my logos, I always start with black and white. The reason for this is because it has the highest level of contrast. And if it works in black and white and without color, then it means the concept is strong enough to work once I add color. So always start with black and white. And you can see the Nike logo again. They just use black and white on their brand because the logo is so iconic and it works really well on black and white, meaning it would work well anyway in any color you place it, as long as there is contrast. So make sure there is a high contrast in your logos. And I would always suggest to start with black and white first and then add color later on. Because once you start with black and white, you can make sure that the contrast will make it legible and you can read it properly, you can understand it. And a weak contrast will just make it vanish and it will take away all the hard work that you've put into your design and your logo. So keep it as strong as possible by having the most amount of contrast possible. So you need to look at the contrast in colors and just start with black and white first, and then later on do some research and add the appropriate colors to your brand. And I would just suggest having black and white and one additional color in most cases, because you don't want to overload color in your logo and your brand, because you don't want to confuse your audience. You want to just have an additional color to use for your brand. And the rule here is to keep a strong contrast, and the mark that you can't do this for can't be read. So tip number 4 is avoid hair thin lines. And keeping thin lines will be hard to read and is difficult to see, especially when you shrink it down. Once you shrink it down, it's hard to see all those finer details. So make sure you start with solid strokes and the line thickness is kept as bold as you can, so that all the details doesn't disappear. And you also want to make sure that you don't overcrowd the design so that you can see these details, especially if they're bold. It has too much detail, then it will get lost anyway. This is why you need to make sure, firstly, it's simple, and then secondly, it's bold and intentional. So you need to make sure all these lines are intentional and nothing is on accident. You need to then sit down and think, what else can I remove without the meaning fading away? And once you have the simplest approach of this, then you have a winning concept on your hands. But make sure as you thin it down, it doesn't lose detail and it makes sense smaller. So avoid thin lines and refined details that you can only see when it's enlarged, because once it's scaled down, it will cause issues for you. Tip number 5 is you need to make sure that you pick a clear typeface, and the typeface can make or break your brand. You need to make sure that you write down all the keywords and the intentions of the brands that it has to offer. And once you have this, what the important key information is, what they stand for, and then find a typeface to match them and match their energy and their vibe and what they stand for. Make sure that the type you have and you use for that brand and the logo adds clarity to that brand and doesn't take it away. You don't want to have something that is bold and loud and then the typeface disappoints and does the complete opposite. One has to complement the other, and it has to work together really well towards the same direction and same objective and the same goal. So make sure you choose this cleverly and you experiment with a few different fonts, typefaces, and see what works best, and then pick the best possible typeface for that brand. So you need to choose a clear type over a clever type. You don't want anything cliche or just witty. You want to make sure that the core principles and the foundations are there in place with the keywords and the brand's energy and brand's vibes. So keep this in mind with the typeface, because as long as your logo itself is strong enough and smart, you don't need to overplay this with the text as well. Just have the text complement everything else and keep it professional in most scenarios. Tip number 6 is you need to test it in a tiny format. Make sure you scale it all the way down and see if the detail is still there and you can see everything with the logo. And if you can't, then the logo is too complicated and it needs to be simplified further. So test it for icon and then see if it works. If it doesn't, simplify it and then see what else you can take away and reduce so that you can avoid this, because you want to make sure it works as an icon and it works in every size. You could see the Nike logo works in different sizes, and you can scale it all the way up and then you can scale it all the way down to icon. It will work on a billboard and it will work on an app because it's legible throughout the brand, and regardless of where you place it, it will make sense. It's bold, it has filled shapes, and it just makes sense. The contrast there, everything's there. It's clean, it's memorable, and they tick all the boxes. So make sure that your logo ticks all the boxes too before you move to the next step. Scale it all the way down, make sure it makes sense, and then we can move further from there. This brings us to tip number 7. Test it squinting. So squint your eyes and make sure all the details in your logo is still there before you go and test other things in the process. So make sure you blur your eyes and make sure all the details are there, and then you move on to the next step. So tip number 8, you can see this example on the right. This is one of the logos I made. It reads straight away. As soon as you see it, all the elements that I discussed in this video are there and present. So you can see this is a logo I made for Fox Energy, and both elements of the core logo and principles that I've covered in this video are there. It's legible, you can squint, and it will still make sense. You can scale it down and shrink it to a app icon, it will make sense. And you can scale it all the way up to a billboard, it will also make sense. So make sure that it ticks all the boxes to make sure that the logo is legible across board. And once you do this, you have a winning logo and a concept on your hands, and it works all the way through. And if you want a brand that just looks right from the get-go and you want it all done for you, click the first link in the description down below, and I'll be happy to jump on a free consultation call with you to help you in any way that I can. Thank you guys for watching my video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much.